Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his...
Prince Edward stayed quiet while the louder royals grabbed headlines. But this time, that silence may have spoken louder than anything happening inside the palace walls. Behind the polished smiles, priceless jewels, and perfectly staged royal appearances, whispers started spreading about a brooch, the coronation, and Camilla's place beside William's future throne. Nothing was officially announced, but everything about it felt deliberate. Some royal watchers even believe Edward quietly stepped in to stop a move the palace never wanted the public to question. So now people are asking, is Prince Edward secretly protecting William's future reign, or are these palace rumors getting way out of control? As King Charles III spent years preparing to take the throne, Edward's role barely changed at all. He showed up, handled his duties, and disappeared from headlines almost immediately afterward. But that low profile was never random. It was built into the royal system from the start. As the youngest child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, Edward was never expected to lead the monarchy, never trained to dominate royal politics, and never viewed as someone who would shape the crown's future. By 2026, sitting 15th in the line of succession only confirmed that reality. Edward wasn't just far from the throne, he was practically invisible in the bigger royal picture. But somewhere between 2025 and 2026, something started shifting behind the scenes. Not with dramatic speeches or shocking announcements, but through tiny changes people only noticed if they were paying very close attention. While other senior royals faced scandals, public pressure, and non-stop tension during 2025, Edward and Sophie, now the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, quietly started expanding their presence across the world. Their international tours weren't just routine appearances either. Every visit felt strategic, carefully planned to strengthen their image while proving loyalty to King Charles at the same time. Inside the monarchy, perception matters almost as much as power itself, and suddenly Edward and Sophie were gaining serious momentum. Public support reflected that shift fast. Polling showed around 50 to 51% of British citizens viewed them favorably, while negative opinions stayed surprisingly low at just 19% and 12%. Those numbers weren't just decent, they were strong enough to turn heads inside palace circles. And things became even more noticeable when compared to Queen Camilla's changing public image. Her approval ratings reportedly dropped to 42%, the lowest YouGov had recorded since March 2021, while unfavorable opinions climbed to 45%. At first glance, it looked like a minor gap, but inside the monarchy, numbers like that can quietly change influence and power. For a man who spent decades overlooked, Edward was suddenly operating from a place of growing public trust that quietly outperformed the Queen herself. Then came the small adjustments. Nothing explosive happened publicly. No dramatic arguments. No official palace statements. Instead, there were subtle changes that started raising eyebrows. Certain engagements disappeared from schedules. Appearances shifted. Edward began showing up at events where Camilla's closest allies weren't present, and after a while it became harder to call it coincidence. Inside royal circles, patterns like that don't stay unnoticed for long. Because inside palace life, almost nothing happens by accident. Every movement, every absence, every seat placement, and every public appearance carries meaning. When someone who has followed the royal script for decades suddenly changes even small details, people notice immediately. And when that person is Prince Edward, someone known for staying silent, the message becomes even louder. But while Edward's influence was quietly growing through restraint and consistency, Camilla appeared to be sending much louder signals of her own. Some people wondered whether these were simply royal traditions or calculated moves meant to reinforce her authority before William eventually took the throne. And that's where the story gets even deeper. Inside the monarchy, power is rarely spoken about directly. Instead, it gets communicated through symbols, tiny details, and carefully chosen gestures that look harmless to the public but mean everything behind palace doors. Among those symbols, royal jewelry carries serious weight, especially brooches. Royal experts have pointed out that brooches are never random accessories. They are selected carefully and often carry hidden meanings tied to loyalty, authority, remembrance, and status. Unlike necklaces or earrings, which mostly complete a look, brooches are positioned close to the heart, making them powerful symbols inside royal tradition. Then came early 2023, during a period already filled with tension surrounding the monarchy, fallout from the Andrew scandal, and growing conversations about Prince William's future as king. During that moment, Camilla appeared wearing a brooch that immediately grabbed attention across royal circles. The piece, first seen publicly in early 2023, was widely believed to be a personal gift from King Charles ahead of their coronation. But it wasn't just expensive jewelry. The design itself carried a massive message. In February 2023, Camilla wore a brooch shaped like the Tudor crown, covered in sapphires, rubies, and emeralds. That symbol wasn't chosen lightly. The Tudor crown is deeply connected to King Charles III's official royal cipher and carries historical links reaching back to King George VI, Charles's grandfather. So when Camilla pinned that symbol to her chest, many royal watchers saw it as far more than fashion. To some, it looked like a visual statement of authority and alignment with the king himself. Without saying a single word, she appeared to place Charles's identity directly beside her own, reinforcing her place at the center of the monarchy during a period when public opinion around her remained shaky. But while Camilla used visible symbolism, Edward and Sophie seemed to respond in a completely different way. They didn't try to outshine anyone. They didn't release statements or push for attention. Instead, they leaned into something quieter but possibly more effective: reliability. They showed up consistently. They handled responsibilities others were expected to cover. They became the calm and dependable face of the monarchy during moments filled with uncertainty and tension. And strangely enough, that steady presence started drawing even more attention precisely because they weren't demanding it. Royal analysts have often pointed out that the strongest symbolism inside the palace isn't always loud. Sometimes the most powerful message is the one delivered quietly over time, allowing people to slowly connect the dots themselves. That's exactly how Edward and Sophie's role began to feel. Their consistency, their carefully timed appearances, even their silence, all started forming a pattern people could no longer ignore. Little by little, expectations inside the monarchy seemed to shift around them without a single public confrontation ever taking place. And once silence, symbolism, and strategic presence begin lining up together, they stop looking accidental. They start looking intentional. That's why the real question now isn't whether a shift is happening inside Buckingham Palace. The real question is where that shift is leading and who the palace is quietly preparing to stand at the center of it all. Because the future of the monarchy is no longer some distant conversation hidden behind palace gates. The arrival of King William V already feels like a countdown ticking quietly in the background. And that growing reality appears to be shaping everything happening inside Buckingham Palace right now, from major public appearances down to the smallest details most people would never even notice. Every move inside the royal family suddenly seems to carry extra weight now. Every absence sparks new rumors, every photo gets analyzed online, and every person standing near the future king starts looking less accidental and way more calculated. What makes this moment so unusual isn't just the transition toward William eventually becoming king. It's how early the palace appears to be setting everything into place behind the scenes. The question nobody openly asks, but everyone inside royal circles seems to answer through actions alone, is simple. When the crown finally passes to William, who will actually stand closest to the throne, and who will quietly be pushed to the side? That question became impossible to ignore during the Easter service of 2026. After being absent from the event since 2023, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, returned beside Prince William along with their 3 children. And honestly, that image alone said more than any official palace statement ever could. It wasn't just a public appearance, it felt like a message. After months of illness, rumors, speculation, and non-stop public attention, the Wales family appeared united and ready for the future ahead. The timing made everything even louder. Just weeks earlier, on February 19, 2026, the monarchy faced fresh scrutiny that exposed cracks inside the institution and raised serious questions about where things were heading next. The Easter service suddenly became more than tradition. It looked like a carefully controlled moment designed to replace uncertainty with stability and unity. But it wasn't only about who showed up. People also noticed exactly where everyone stood, and that's where things started getting really interesting. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, stood close beside Prince William, not hidden in the background, but clearly positioned inside the visible structure of the monarchy's future. Standing beside Edward was his son James, the Earl of Wessex. Nearby stood Princess Anne with Sir Timothy Lawrence, while Peter Phillips appeared with his daughters and fiancé. Every single placement added to a growing pattern that royal watchers couldn't ignore anymore. And then came the absences, which sometimes speak louder than appearances inside palace life. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, was expected to stand beside Edward, yet she never appeared at all. The official explanation pointed toward illness, which sounded simple enough on the surface. But inside royal circles, absences rarely stay simple for long. At the same time, people noticed members connected to Queen Camilla's circle appeared unusually scattered throughout the event instead of standing together. That contrast quietly grabbed attention fast. When all those details get placed side by side, the pattern starts looking very deliberate. Edward's placement near William, Anne's visible support, the Wales family standing front and center, and the absence of others all seem to point towards something bigger happening quietly beneath the surface. No official announcement was needed. The message looked built directly into the structure of the event itself, because inside the monarchy, power almost never announces itself openly. It reveals itself through positioning, proximity, timing, and who gets included in key moments. Right now, the people who matter most already seem to be standing exactly where they need to stand. And when placement, absence, and consistency start lining up this perfectly, it stops looking random and starts looking intentional. But patterns like this don't appear from nowhere. Something deeper had to shift inside the royal family to create them in the first place. What now looks like Prince Edward quietly rising inside palace influence actually began during one of the monarchy's loudest internal crises. To understand why Edward's position suddenly changed so noticeably, you have to go back to the moment the balance inside the royal family completely cracked apart. Prince Andrew's downfall didn't just damage his own reputation, it created a huge vacuum inside the monarchy that someone eventually had to fill. At 66 years old, Andrew was pushed out of Royal Lodge in Windsor, the Grade II listed Georgian mansion where he had lived since 2004, alongside Sarah Ferguson. That move alone already signaled a major break inside the family, but things didn't stop there. Andrew was later relocated to Wood Farm, a far more isolated home on the Sandringham estate, marking a dramatic shift from royal prominence to quiet distance. Then came the biggest blow yet. In October, King Charles III officially stripped Andrew of his titles, cementing his fall from grace and sending a clear message throughout the monarchy that there would be no return to his previous standing. But the fallout didn't stay limited to Andrew alone. The entire internal structure of the royal family suddenly became disrupted, and that disruption reached Edward directly. Edward and Sophie had reportedly planned to spend Easter at Wood Farm, following a long-standing private family tradition tied closely to the royal calendar. But because Andrew remained there, those plans suddenly collapsed. What had once been routine became uncertain almost overnight. Yet Edward's response to the situation may have revealed more than anything else that followed. He didn't complain publicly. He didn't release statements. He didn't try spinning headlines in his favor. Instead, something much quieter and much more revealing reportedly happened behind palace walls. Reports claimed Edward became the first senior royal to visit Andrew after his arrest connected to allegations involving misconduct in public office. At that same time, even King Charles, despite reportedly being only a mile away at Sandringham, chose not to meet his brother. Edward did meet him. But according to reports, the visit wasn't about sympathy or defending Andrew publicly. It was about resolution. Edward allegedly encouraged Andrew to speed up his departure from Wood Farm instead of allowing the situation to drag on and create more tension inside the monarchy. That one move revealed something important about Edward's role inside the royal system. He wasn't running from the crisis, but he also wasn't exploiting it for attention either. He was managing it quietly behind the scenes. And that same approach seemed to define everything that happened afterward. While headlines stayed focused on scandal, pressure, and controversy, Edward quietly handled responsibilities, absorbed tension, and helped stabilize the structure of the family itself. Then came another moment people quietly noticed. When King Charles released the honors list in April 2024, names like Queen Camilla, Prince William, and Princess Catherine appeared exactly as expected. But Edward and Sophie were missing completely. That absence raised eyebrows because by that point, Edward and Sophie had already taken on far more responsibility, while Charles reduced parts of his schedule following his cancer diagnosis. They were helping maintain royal visibility during an extremely difficult period, yet recognition still didn't follow publicly. Still, Edward and Sophie never changed their approach. They kept working at the same steady pace that had defined them for years. And inside the monarchy, loyalty measured over time becomes extremely powerful. That consistency doesn't disappear. It builds quietly, year after year, until influence starts shifting almost without people realizing it. And once consistency survives pressure long enough, it stops looking routine and starts becoming a real influence inside palace life. Now the biggest question becomes impossible to ignore. What happens when that quiet influence starts spreading beyond palace walls and into public opinion itself? Because underneath all the ceremonies, traditions, and royal appearances, the monarchy runs heavily on perception. And right now, public opinion numbers are telling a story the palace can't fully control anymore. Queen Camilla's standing has reportedly shifted in a way that's becoming harder to dismiss. Recent YouGov polling placed her favorability at 42%, the lowest level recorded since March 2021, while negative perception climbed to 45%. And once those numbers flip in the public eye, the balance inside the monarchy can start changing a whole lot faster than people expect. More people now reportedly view Queen Camilla negatively than positively, and that detail carries way more weight than a simple polling number. Inside the monarchy, public opinion can quietly shape influence, access, and long-term power. And when those numbers start shifting, palace insiders notice fast. Now compare that to King Charles III, whose approval ratings have stayed surprisingly strong. Around 60% of the British public reportedly view him positively, while only about 31% see him negatively. That alone already creates a noticeable divide inside the public image of the monarchy. But things become even more dramatic once Prince Edward and Sophie enter the picture. Roughly half of the British public reportedly view Edward and Sophie favorably, while only 19% and 12% hold negative opinions about them. Those numbers quietly place Edward in a position where his net approval reportedly beats Camilla's by a huge margin. And inside royal life, public support becomes a form of political capital. It affects how freely someone can operate, how much trust they quietly build, and how influential they become behind palace walls. That's why the current imbalance is getting harder for royal watchers to ignore. Because while the palace continues presenting a united front publicly, the details underneath that polished image seem to tell a very different story. Take the Commonwealth Day service, for example. On the surface, it looked like another carefully managed royal appearance meant to project continuity and stability. Princess Anne stood out wearing a bold red shibumi gracecoat with a matching scarf, looking calm, composed, and completely in control. Prince William attended as expected, but noticeably without Catherine beside him. Reports claim the Princess of Wales was absent due to a private engagement. On their own, those details may not sound important, but together, they started forming a pattern royal watchers couldn't stop talking about. Moments where the monarchy is expected to appear fully united suddenly don't seem perfectly aligned anymore. Similar little inconsistencies reportedly showed up again at Easter during day-to-day royal duties and in small public moments where gaps started becoming visible. The palace communication strategy still pushes togetherness and stability, but repeated deviations like these have started making people wonder what's really happening beneath the surface. And right in the middle of that shifting dynamic sits Queen Camilla. Her journey into the royal family was never smooth or simple. For years, she faced resistance before finally securing her place beside King Charles. That climb required patience, persistence, and careful image rebuilding over decades. In many ways, she succeeded. But acceptance and stability are not always the same thing. And lately, the foundation underneath her position appears far less secure than before. What makes this entire situation even more fascinating is what's not causing the shift. This isn't being driven by outside scandals like Prince Harry's memoir or the fallout surrounding Prince Andrew. Those controversies definitely created disruption, but they don't appear to be the force quietly reshaping the monarchy's current balance. Instead, the shift seems to be coming from something much quieter and harder to stop: consistency. Prince Edward hasn't tried forcing himself into headlines through interviews, dramatic statements, or public battles. Instead, he's reportedly built influence through timing, visibility, and reliability. He shows up when needed, stays steady while others face turbulence, and allows public support to grow naturally without chasing attention. And once influence starts growing without demanding the spotlight, silence itself begins carrying serious weight. Because sometimes the biggest shift inside the monarchy isn't about who steps forward. It's about who deliberately steps back and why those absences suddenly start speaking louder than appearances. That's exactly why one specific moment reportedly sparked huge whispers across royal circles. And strangely enough, it wasn't a speech, an argument, or even a dramatic public clash. It was an absence. Easter 2026 arrived with all the usual royal expectations, carefully planned appearances, predictable formations, and the familiar image of stability the public expects from the monarchy. Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, was fully expected to stand beside Prince Edward, continuing the dependable image they had built together for years. But at the last minute, Sophie never appeared. The explanation came quickly. Royal editor Rebecca English reportedly stated Sophie was simply feeling unwell. On the surface, that sounded minor enough. But inside palace optics, where timing means everything, even one absence can trigger serious speculation. And the bigger issue was this wasn't the only one. Just weeks earlier, both Edward and Sophie were reportedly absent from the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey, one of the monarchy's most high-profile annual events. Once that absence got paired with Sophie missing Easter too, people immediately started noticing a pattern. Royal analysts reportedly began questioning whether these gaps were truly random, especially since Queen Camilla played a major role at both events. Social media exploded almost instantly. Clips, side-by-side photos, and comparison videos started flooding platforms, with users pointing out how often Sophie's appearances seemed to either align or intentionally avoid aligning with Camilla's orbit. Some online comments described it as quiet distancing. Others called it a subtle but obvious shift in loyalty happening right in front of the public eye. But here's where things get even more interesting. Whenever Sophie does appear publicly, the contrast reportedly becomes impossible to ignore. Her appearances never feel casual or thrown together. At previous Commonwealth Day services, Sophie reportedly appeared in elegant tailored coat dresses by Susanna London, paired with a Jane Taylor hat and a Sophie Habsburg clutch. Every detail looked polished, refined, and carefully controlled. She doesn't just attend royal events, she positions herself. And that precision matters because Sophie doesn't appear to be stepping away from royal life at all. Instead, many royal watchers believe she's becoming far more selective about how she participates in it. Her appearances reportedly feel calculated, her absences feel intentional, and her positioning consistently appears connected to a broader long-term strategy that stretches far beyond individual events. Inside palace politics, that level of control almost never happens accidentally. Royal spouses aren't passive figures standing quietly in the background. They operate as partners helping shape perception, influence, and direction inside the institution itself. And in this case, Sophie's movements, whether visible or not, seem deeply tied to Prince Edward's evolving role inside the monarchy. Together, Edward and Sophie increasingly appear to operate like a coordinated unit. Every appearance strengthens that image, every absence reinforces it. And slowly, they seem to be building a public identity that doesn't fully revolve around the current center of power surrounding Camilla. Instead, their positioning appears to lean much closer toward the future connected to Prince William and Catherine. And once absences start repeating with this level of precision, people stop seeing them as coincidence and start viewing them as strategy. That's why the conversation online has reportedly shifted from simple gossip to full analysis. Royal watchers now examine event footage, track appearances, and study who stands beside whom, almost like investigators putting together a puzzle. Hashtags connected to Easter 2026 and Commonwealth Day reportedly trended briefly as users pointed out how often Edward seemed aligned near Prince William's circle, while Sophie's absences appeared to remove direct overlap with Camilla's presence. It's subtle, but it's incredibly effective, because inside the monarchy, alignment is rarely announced openly. It gets shown through positioning, visibility, and carefully controlled appearances. And what many people believe they're seeing now is a quiet repositioning already underway. The image Edward and Sophie are building feels increasingly tied to the future surrounding the Wales family, rather than the current structure surrounding Camilla. Their moves suggest long-term thinking, not just about today's royal hierarchy, but about what happens after King Charles III's reign eventually comes to an end. And that's where palace politics becomes impossible to ignore. Every appearance, every absence, every seat placement, every public moment, it all becomes part of a much larger story unfolding quietly over time. Edward's increasing visibility beside Prince William, combined with Sophie's selective participation, reportedly creates a dynamic that shifts attention naturally without ever demanding it directly. It doesn't break the royal system. It adjusts it, and that adjustment carries serious weight. Their strategy doesn't seem built around confrontation or drama. Instead, it appears centered on positioning. They choose carefully when to step forward and when to step back, communicating through the silent language that has always controlled royal life. Inside that system, presence signals support, absence signals distance, and both become incredibly powerful when used carefully. The partnership between Edward and Sophie only strengthens that strategy even more. Their actions consistently appear coordinated, helping shape a stable public image piece by piece over time. Rather than reacting emotionally to events, they seem focused on shaping how those events are perceived in the first place. Which now raises the biggest question quietly sitting underneath nearly every royal appearance. When the monarchy eventually enters its next era, whose alignment will truly define the center of power? Because once positioning becomes deliberate for this long, it stops feeling subtle and starts shaping the future itself. The real story may not be about who stands closest to the throne today, but about how those quiet choices are slowly building tomorrow's monarchy one carefully controlled move at a time. And long before any official announcement ever arrives, the future of the royal family already appears to be taking shape through symbolism, approval ratings, strategic appearances, and even carefully timed absences. Publicly, the monarchy still looks stable. Nearly 6 in 10 Britons reportedly continue viewing the institution favorably, and many still believe it provides national value and pride. According to YouGov polling, the monarchy itself doesn't appear under immediate threat, but the individuals representing it, the faces on the palace balcony, the figures standing closest to the future crown, seem far more fluid than ever before. Camilla's role highlights that reality perfectly. Her rise to queen took decades of persistence, but her position won't remain the same forever. Once Prince William eventually becomes king, Catherine will step into the role of queen consort, while Camilla will naturally step further into the background. What remains uncertain is how far into the background that step will really be. Will she continue holding major influence as a senior royal figure, or will she slowly become part of a previous royal era, quietly fading from the center stage? That answer isn't being decided later. Many believe it's already being shaped right now. And Prince Edward seems to understand that better than most people inside the royal family. Instead of picking loud public fights or chasing headlines, Edward reportedly continues building his image around consistency, reliability, and long-term service. During 2025, he represented both the King and the United Kingdom during important international visits, including a trip to Papua New Guinea celebrating the nation's 50th anniversary of independence, along with a joint visit to Japan beside Sophie. Those weren't just symbolic photo opportunities. They reportedly strengthened Edward's credibility beyond palace politics and reinforced his value to the monarchy itself. Because when the next royal transition finally comes, the people standing closest to the crown likely won't be the loudest voices. They'll be the figures who position themselves correctly years before the moment ever arrived. And Edward's entire strategy increasingly seems built around that exact understanding. He hasn't released memoirs. He hasn't chased media wars. He hasn't fought publicly for attention. Instead, he relies on something much quieter: presence when necessary, absence when strategic, and silence when it speaks loudest of all.